God can't exist. Here's why. Part 2. Free will. The notion of free will is so important for theism, for many versions of it anyway. The notion that God is watching over us, He's watching everything you do, making sure that your free choices are either good or bad to see if He can judge you and either get you to hell or heaven, right? So, if you take away this notion of free will from theism, you're left with a God who determined us to be this way. Why would He judge us? Free will is incredibly integral for many versions of theism. So the next question is, what if we don't have free will? That poses a big problem for theists. As they love to proclaim that free will exists, it must exist. Well, here's a logical argument as to why free will does not exist, and why it's a good reason why God also doesn't exist. So firstly, it might seem as if we have free will. It might seem as if what I'm doing right now, making this video, talking, it seems like I'm freely doing this. But we have to ask ourselves, why am I doing this? Why am I talking? Why am I making this video, for example? Why? Well, I'm making this video because I want to show people that there are no good reasons to believe in a God or any notion of a God. Okay, why? Why did I want that? Did I choose that want? No, I didn't really choose to want this. It's just people and their experiences around me, my environment, they kind of influenced me to make this video, right? Because I look at their experiences and go, wow, that's pretty bad. Let me see if I can help these people. So I make this video. So me as an agent, I'm being influenced by other people and experiences in my environment. So kind of like my environment is making me who I am. Where's the freedom there? If the actions I'm doing, if the things I want are influenced by other people around me, how am I freely choosing anything? And we can get technical about this. We can talk about how my brain is just simply responding to stimuli from the outside world. My neurons are firing my brain. These firings yield thoughts and feelings in my mind, which then dictate how I'm speaking and acting right now. So if we take a look at this whole process, where's the freedom there? How do I have freedom if I can't even choose what I want? If I can't freely choose what I want, and my wants determine what I do, how can I have freedom there? And if you think about it, there's only really two reasons why we do things. Either because it's determined to be that way, or because there's randomness involved. The things we do are random. We just randomly do it. Are things that are random really chosen to be that way, or are they just random? They're random. There's no freedom there. They're not chosen. They're just random things that happen. And if you think that there's a soul behind us, if you think that there's some kind of soul or metaphysical thing happening, the question remains, what causes that to happen? Is that process random, or is it determined either? Right? Where's the freedom involved if, the only causal mechanisms are random or basically determined to happen that way? Where's the freedom? And this question is a big problem for theists, because if freedom doesn't exist, why did God bring us here? This life is no longer a test to see how good or bad we can be. Right? That's the problem. Free will is so integral for theism that any hint of it not existing, theism collapses. But there's also another problem with free will. It also has to do with omniscience. If God is omniscient, meaning He knows all true propositions, and the future is included there, if God knows the future and knows them all, and that He can't be wrong about His knowledge, this poses a problem for freedom. Because if God knows what I will do before I do it, that signifies a determined world. It signifies that my actions can only be in alignment with God's foreknowledge. So for example, if God knows I will buy a car tomorrow, it must happen. It has to happen because God has foreknowledge of it, and His foreknowledge is infallible. So tomorrow comes, I go to the car dealer, I buy a car. Could I have chosen to buy a truck instead? No, if God knows I will buy a car, I can't buy a truck because I must buy a car because God knows I will do it. There's no freedom there if I can only do things that God knows I will do. Now, this is a paradox. There's a compatibility issue between free will and omniscience if you think omniscience means knowing the future. Now, a lot of theists will say, well, Mike, just because God knows the future doesn't mean He's determining you to do that thing. Well, okay, but that still doesn't change the fact that the future is determined. It signifies some deterministic causal mechanism. It signifies that there's some deterministic feature of the universe that makes a future outcome, and one future outcome the only one that actualizes. That's the problem. If only one future actualizes, it doesn't matter if God, wherever is doing it, there's some deterministic factor determining our future, which means that free will cannot exist in that world. Now, a lot of theists will appeal to open theism, will just say, well, God doesn't know the future. The future is unknowable. How can he know it? God can only know logical things because the future is not logical. It hasn't happened yet. Okay, well, if this is the case, you've now just conceded that you have no prophecies. All the prophecies that theists proclaim to have that God, foresees the future no longer are valid because God can't see the future. It hasn't happened yet. So how can God prophesize about it? All your prophecies in the Quran and the Bible, they go bye-bye. They're invalid. But this also poses a problem for God's plan that he supposedly has for us. If God has a plan for us and is simply making the universe operate the way it does, such that as we live our lives, we lead to the trajectory of that one outcome, right, that God wants for us, this big plan for us. If that's the case, how can God know that that outcome will happen? In other words, if our actions as free agents are able to change the future such that God can't know it, well, this means that any person can thwart God's plans. It can stop God's plans from happening. So, for example, if God has a plan for somebody who is sick, right, and that they get cured, God has a plan for that person. What if somebody comes in and, unalives that person before the disease is cured? God could not foresee it. God's plan is now thwarted. God's plan is now stopped because that plan that he had for that person can no longer be actualized. And if you take this concept and apply it to all possible events in the world that have happened in the past, it's obviously clear that God having a plan for us is no longer even valid because every action that we do is going to stop the plan from happening. So you can't conceptualize a universe where God has a plan at all anymore because every action we do as free agents will thwart it, eliminate it, erase his plan completely, make it unable to even happen in the first place. These are some big problems for theism. But these arguments are to show you that the more we pose these problems for theists, and the more they try to explain away these things with, excuses, the notion of God is reduced more and more and more to something that's pretty much human-like. It's pretty much a human. And this is one of the biggest reasons why I think the God that we have defined today does not exist.